Connecting. Hi, I'm Steve Blank, and I'm here with Lisa Hershman, who's the Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense. Lisa, my first question is, what the heck is a Chief Management Officer in the DoD? What do you do, and what's the role, and why is it important?
It's a good question because it's actually a brand new role. It was modeled off of industry and some of the, high level transformation offices, COO type of offices. And the role has only been around for 2 years. So it was officially stood up on February 1 of 2018. And the role has several components. So first of all, it is the number 3 position in the Department of Defense.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yes. It's actually was by design, because one of my main responsibilities is driving reform across all of DoD. And studying the private sector and what business transformation offices have done, they recognize that without a high level of authority and having a high rank in the organization, you can't affect change. So I've had colleagues that have referred to me as the Chief Change Management Officer. And my role is multifaceted. Number one, I am responsible for driving reform across all of the Department of Defense. And within that responsibility, I have been given the authority to overrule the service secretaries. So Secretary of the Army, Navy, or Air Force, if there is a time where we are not in agreement on something that's reform related, I actually have the final say.
Now, well, that makes friends.
Yeah. You know what? Here's the good news, is I know that innovation and reform is a collaborative art, and with some science as well. And the good news is I haven't had to do that. Usually when we come to some kind of an impasse, we sit down and talk it out and come to an agreement. So it hasn't been anything that I've had to really exercise in an overpowering way. Other areas that I oversee are oversight and compliance. So anytime that we have regulations, any breaches when it comes to data or personal information, we manage those breaches. We have to do all of the reporting. We have to notify Congress. So that's another part of my duties. The Senior Intel Oversight Officer reports to me. We have a group of data scientists, and we focus on business operations and business analytics, which has been a game changer, also new to DoD. That's been a game changer for us with providing people with good data to make data-informed decisions. And we use data a lot to help us prioritize our reform. And then we have a big organization that we refer to as the Fourth Estate. And it's filled with defense agencies and field activities. And 2 of them direct report to me. One is called Washington Headquarters Services. And we do everything from manage the Pentagon and all of our leased buildings, the facilities. We manage contracts, we manage the cleaning staff. So we have that responsibility. And then the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, so the police department, including all the police dogs, also report to me. So it's a sizable organization. And for all of you who are not familiar with the Department of Defense, let me give you a few facts and figures that you might find interesting. We have the 19th largest economy in the world. We're about, from an economy standpoint, we're about the size of Belgium. We have, if you walked all of the corridors, you would cover 17.5 miles, and that's just in the Pentagon. And within the Pentagon, we have 284 bathrooms. And every day we have about 23,000 people that come to work. If you come to the Pentagon, and I would love to host any of your students, we have post office, we have banks, we have restaurants, we have jewelry stores, we have a CVS. It's like a small country.
And a great gift shop, I should remind everybody.
Glad you had a chance to visit.
And Lisa, you mentioned to me in one of our conversations that there are 66 CIOs across the DoD, just for scale, right? I mean, just to manage ops.
Yes, we have multiple networks. We actually have 355 cloud initiatives.
Wow.
And so we operate like a small country that has multiple either businesses or organizations. We have our own medical university. We run defense acquisition university. So we have school systems at the university levels. We run schools on our bases for our military families. So grade schools, for example. We have an entire grocery store and retail configuration we call commissaries and exchanges, primarily for those that live on base or just off base so that they can access. And that's not only within the US, but also outside the continental US. So we are a lot, we have a lot more to the Department of Defense. And that's why aligning or using the that it's similar to a small country is very apt. We're not just we're not a company.
Wow, that's an amazing size and scale.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, you have a background as an innovator before you came into the DoD. Can you share with us, what prepared you for this job, and what kind of insights you had about innovation in the private sector you think are applicable in the DoD?
Well,
So
yeah, that's okay. Let me tell you, if you'd asked me even 5 years ago if I thought I'd be sitting here, I would have probably giggled. This is my first time working in government, and my role is the only role within all of DoD that is specifically required to have minimum of 7 years of industry experience specific to large-scale reform. So prior to coming here, I worked in everything from heavy manufacturing. I worked with Caterpillar doing mechanical and hydraulic fuel injection systems. My background is in engineering. And I've also worked in the tech sector. I've worked in supply chain and logistics for a company called Avnet based in Phoenix, Arizona. I worked for GE Aerospace. That was the closest I came to government, where I worked on large radar and sonar installations, and I worked on the Seawolf submarine program. And so it was quite a variety, and that was a little bit of happenstance from a career standpoint. But as I look back, it has really prepared me well for innovation, reform, and transformation, because I can see similarities across many organizations and how you can take those and apply them to the Department of Defense. We have supply chain and logistics, like I said, hospitals, we have schools, we have grocery stores. So having a varied background was a huge advantage to me. And while the details of challenges that organizations have, there are a lot of things that organizations have in common, regardless of whether it's private sector or public sector. Looking at outcome metrics, identifying problems and not addressing symptoms, motivating and upskilling your personnel and your employees. We have some unique challenges. For me, I'm always looking for data scientists, and I'm competing with the private sector. We are capped at our salaries, and so I can't throw a lot of dollars at people. So we have to think of creative ways, even when it comes to recruiting talent. And I usually say to people, if you're ready for one big, hairy, audacious problem, we've got them in droves. So come exercise your talent and take it to scale. So we can offer unique career problem-solving opportunities that other organizations simply can't.
We're working for the world's 16th largest economy, for sure.
Yeah.
So Lisa, I don't mean to surprise you, but with this question, but it just makes me think, what was the biggest surprise for you making that transition from corporate to government, right? It's different language, different whatever.
It is.
What were the top things that just were surprised?
So first of all, I am probably one of the very, very few people who walked in on my first day and didn't know a single person. So many of the folks, even those that are appointees, may have served in a previous administration and knew each other. So that was quite the challenge. I had the advantage where in my private sector work, I had run reform for a Fortune 100 company in 72 countries. So I got used to different cultures, different languages, and you hit upon it. That's exactly how I decided that the best way for me to assimilate into the culture was to treat it as if it were a foreign country. And you're right, they have their own language, they have uniforms, there are customs that people may not know. For instance, we have military assistants, and they taught me that when you walk down the hallway, there is a certain way you walk down the hallway as to who's the closest to the right-hand side of the wall is the higher ranking individual. And so there is a lot of protocol, a lot of customs. When I say about our own language, we talk in acronyms, and I am still 2 years in and I'm still learning acronyms. So if you approach it like it's a different country, and rather than trying to change things to your way, first assimilate into the culture and then introduce new ways of thinking, new approaches, new processes, that was my approach. And my biggest aha was I expected a tremendous amount of, you don't understand us, you're from the private sector, you couldn't possibly understand. And what I found is since I took the time to get to know the culture at DoD, they started to reciprocate by asking me, well, how is this different or similar in the private sector? And there was an opening and a receptiveness to outside thinking and processes. Now, it may take a lot longer to implement, but that receptivity was a big step forward.
That's great. That was really interesting and informative, Lisa. And now that you're in, and if you could wave a magic wand, knowing what you know now, right? That is, everybody just magically agreed and Congress appropriated the money or changed the laws or whatever, what's the top 1, 2, or 3 things you would want to see changed that the DoD magic would happen?
Well, one thing that I have found has been difficult is we have and maybe many of your students can relate to this, we have so many repositories of everything, whether it's data, whether it's contracts, whether it's, you may not realize this, but the Navy is on its own email system. And so having those silos, and when I say silos, again, given the scale, there are silos within silos within silos. One thing that would be a game changer for us, and we're working on that, is bringing together data and having a repository that can give us reports and dashboards and a real mechanism for real-time performance would be absolutely stunning within DoD.
And you're just talking about it as a start on the management systems of the DoD.
Yes, yes.
The tail rather than the tooth. Is that
true?
Right?
Yes.
In fact, can you explain tooth versus tail and the percentage and the part you own and the part people think of the DoD as guns and ships and whatever, but it's really the support infrastructure that takes a huge chunk of that budget.
Right. We have millions of military personnel. And so those that are close to the fight are what we consider the tooth. And by the way, this took me a long time to figure out what people were talking about with tooth and tail. And then you've got this big enabling and governing structure that is the tail that helps to support that tooth. And so we support in a variety of ways. And let me just give you a very small, easy to relate to example. We have come under fire from Congress to have much fewer contracts and that we're spending too much money on service contracts. And I've argued back and said, well, sometimes that end strength or that tooth, putting more to the front lines and having our military might may come through a contract. So when I have naval officers who are working in the mess hall and I can replace that with a contract and put those 2 individuals on a ship, I've now strengthened our military force, and I'm using a smarter way of enabling and hopefully doing it in a cost-effective way. So that's the little bit of the balance between tooth and tail.
And that's always been in the last 20 or 30 years, the big debate is how much do you outsource what were traditionally military activities, including doing KP to now a food service company versus having service people do those jobs.
Right. And that's the second on my wish list is I think we have an opportunity to do many, many more public-private partnerships, having agreements and opportunities, say, with universities, with other organizations, private sector. We're starting to attract private equity investment, which is new. You know, back in the 40s, DoD was known as the research and development organization within the United States. But that has changed with the advancement of so many universities. Now we are looking to have partners that we can rely on and trust, and can actually help us strengthen our capabilities within the building. And that is something we've started, but like any other, or many other, I should say, government agencies, there's a lot of bureaucracy. And so my third on the wish list is, we're doing some great things. I just wish we could move a little faster.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, when you think about partnerships with the outside,
Mhm.
you know, the military historically is kind of organized headquarters staff among, you know, execution organizations like intelligence or fires or operations or sustainment, et cetera. And there's not really a, you know, an S9 or S10 for partnerships and innovation, right?
Right.
It's because we've just not structured. And then you've got to fit these things into a box that already exists. Must be really frustrating trying to point out to something to others that there's a function that's missing that we can now do in the 21st century.
You're absolutely right. And that, you know, since I always tease everybody at DoD, I said, when I came in, you made me learn hundreds and hundreds of acronyms. I will be successful if you all learn one, and that's ETDBW, easy to do business with. And that I was a contact.
Does that go with we're here from the government, we're here to help you? Is that
A little bit. And here's what's interesting is, one thing that when I first came on board, the Deputy Secretary Shanahan, who was in the DSD role at the time, said to me, Lisa, everybody says we need to change our culture. What do you think? And I said, your culture is one of your strongest assets. I said, keep the culture, figure out how to leverage it for advancement in terms of innovation and progress. Change your policies, your practices, your processes, your technology, your approach to things, but learn how to leverage your culture. And the reason I say that is, in my private sector experience, there were times where I had to spend with a client, when I had my own consulting firm, a long time getting them reacquainted with the voice of the customer. You can walk into the Pentagon and stop anybody, including contractors, and say, who's the customer? You'll get the same answer. And that's not to be underestimated. So channeling that strength into, and always looking at our innovations through the lens of the customer, is a huge motivation within DoD.
right? And what do you think if looking forward? And now I'm just curious, Lisa, it's now 4 years or 5 years or N years from now. What do you wish you're now looking back? What do you think is going to be the biggest change you made?
Oh, well, I'm not done yet.
I know if we're now 10 years or 5 years in the future. What do you think if things go well? What do you think you changed?
So if things go well, we will, first of all, we'll shift from output metrics to outcome metrics.
That's a big idea, right?
It is, and it's challenging, and you have to do it. It's not a big bang approach. You have to help people identify what the difference is. I'll give you a great example from our medical industry within DoD. We used to measure success of a knee replacement by the length of the incision. That's an output metric. Now think about how many days where you are able to walk unassisted. That's an outcome metric. So when we think about that tooth to tail, and what are outcome metrics for whether you're on the tooth side or the tail side, what do those look like and how do they align? So that would be one. Number two, and this is I think your students will, considering the class, will really appreciate this. I'm a certified Scrum Master, and I've gone through certified Agile leadership classes. So I'm a big believer in lean and agile. And when I first started, I asked how many Scrum Masters we had. And I almost got this little pat on the head and said, "Oh, ma'am, we don't develop software here." And I thought, oh my goodness, we have a long way to go. So bringing in more modern techniques and having the ability to bring these concepts into day-to-day operations and advance, whether it's research or even reform initiatives, through looking at it from a minimum viable product. And then setting up dashboards that look like, taking in lean concepts and so forth. One of the biggest things that's on my wish list that I can leave behind is better use of our resources, whether that's money or whether it's talent. We're shifting the way we think about talent and how to attract talent. You think about our Space Force. Right now, we recruit folks for the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines by their age, their physical fitness, their capabilities. But I remember Secretary Barbara Barrett saying, what if Stephen Hawking becomes the ideal candidate for Space Force? So it's a very different way of thinking, and how can we affect that talent pool and recruit top talent regardless of which fighting domain you may participate in. And then finally, and this is something I'm starting to do now, is rethinking business models. So we have an organization called the Defense Logistics Agency that does a variety of things, whether it's procuring commodities and storing and inventory and supply chain, but they also run a fuel farm, and we buy jet fuel in massive quantities. In the private sector, that might be 3 separate P&Ls with 3 separate business models, and we have that all under one. And so the question is, how do we rethink our business models and how we stand up organizations, thinking based on those outcomes and developing capabilities rather than starting with a template and filling in accordingly?
That's a great charter, and that's a great set of outcomes, and hopefully you could accomplish that. Just an amazing set of activities under your purview. And one of the things you mentioned, and I want to close on, is you're talking to a pool of talent here at Stanford and other universities, taking Hacking for Defense class. What would you want to say to them and have them think about careers and connection to the DoD?
So first of all, you are all invited when we are able to travel again and come freely after we get past this pandemic, which has been quite an event, but would be delighted to host any of you out to the Pentagon. It is something to see. It is a bit of a museum, and I don't think you can really appreciate the culture and the atmosphere and the organization until you're there. So come have an experience, and I invite you to do so. I would encourage you, actually, even if you think long-term you're best suited for the private sector, I think spending some time in an organization that challenges your thinking and gets you thinking differently about scale and the art of the possible, DoD is a great place to experience that. So we have many opportunities, whether you're an HQE, which is a highly qualified individual that can come and give expertise, and sometimes we have 2- and 3-year contracts that we can do that. We're trying to establish more internships. All of those things are opportunities, and I would encourage you, whether you're right out of school or maybe you've gone into the workforce for a while and then want to pivot and have a couple of years experience, it's a fantastic opportunity. And there are a lot of crossovers even between the private sector, academia. Like I said, you will have things that you can relate to within DoD because we have so much to offer.
Well, Lisa, that's a great way to close this interview, and I want to thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are and how practices to do remotely. And we're all looking forward to visiting you en masse at the Pentagon and taking you up on it.
Well, thank you. I would be delighted. And thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, we'll make sure that you have a way to reach me via email or through my team. And I'm happy to entertain any other questions that you have. So thank you for your time too, Steve.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.